Hi, everybody. Welcome to the October EERI Younger Members Committee webinar. This one is titled Citizen Advocacy Tools to Advance Seismic Safety Policy. My name is Amanda Sullivan, and I'm a structural engineer at Bureau Happold Engineering in New York City, and I will be moderating today's webinar. For those who may not be familiar, I want to say a few words about EERI. The Earthquake Engineering Research Institute is the leading nonprofit member organization connecting those dedicated to reducing earthquake risk. EERI has been bringing people and disciplines together since 1948. By joining EERI, you become a member of our global network of multidisciplinary professionals dedicated to reducing earthquake risk. Next slide. I want to also say some things about the Younger Members Committee. The committee provides opportunities for early career professionals to advance their careers and to become active in the Institute. The current co-chairs are Ezra Jempol Mahanewi and Ashley Morales Cartagena. Next. Some more about the YMC. We develop technical and social meetings for younger members at the EERI annual meeting and throughout the year, such as the webinars, the YMC blog introducing younger members to leaders in the profession, and connecting with other EERI committees, as you'll see in this presentation today. Please send us an email or go on our website and fill out the form if you're interested in joining. Next. Today we'll be hearing from Zara Syed and Jack English about their experience in PPA, so without further ado, next. First off, Zara is a disaster risk reduction and public policy consultant based in California. She is the founder of Seismic Consulting LLC and is an adjunct professor of architecture and community design at the University of San Francisco. She leads EERI's Public Policy and Advocacy Committee alongside Chris Poland. Next. Jack English is a graduate student at the University of Texas at Austin, where he's earning a dual master's degree in civil engineering and public affairs. Jack has worked for members of the U.S. House of Representatives, the U.S. Senate, and the California Assembly. He currently serves on the EERI Public Policy and Advocacy Committee, its California subcommittee, and as the PPA liaison to the YMC. And with that, I'll turn it over to Zara.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Hopefully you all can hear me. Welcome to our Young Member Committee Citizen Advocacy webinar. Thank you all for joining. Today we'll be talking a little bit about tools to advance seismic safety policy and build up your skills, know-how, and confidence on how to be an effective advocate. Today's agenda, we'll start off with a bit of seismic policy history. We'll get into the Citizen Advocate Toolkit, talk a little bit about the policy arena, and then discuss what your citizen advocacy future can be. And we'll end off last 10 to 15 minutes with some questions. So I'd like to start off by talking a little bit about what public policy is. I like this quote by Thomas Dye. It's that public policy is anything a government chooses to do or not to do. It is policy that may take the form of law, regulation, or the set of all laws and regulations that govern a particular issue or problem. So essentially, it refers to a plan or course of action that's adopted and pursued by a government in response to a perceived societal problem. And in our case, and the focus that we're taking, that's seismic risk reduction with EERI. These concepts can also be applied to other kinds of policy that we're facing today and that are relevant to our expertise. So EERI's involvement in public policy stems from our mission statement, which is to reduce earthquake risk in part by advocating comprehensive and realistic measures for reducing the harmful effects of earthquakes. So I'm going to go over a little bit of the history of seismic safety legislation and law, and these are just selected pieces of legislation, but at the federal level, the most important and seminal is the Earthquake Hazards Reduction Act in 1977, which was motivated by the 1964 Alaska and the 1971 San Fernando earthquakes, where you see that there was a lot of damage that's still talked about today and still a precedent for not only the states that the earthquakes happened in, but also for the rest of the world, and have really inspired a lot of knowledge and understanding of earthquakes. So after the Earthquake Hazards Reduction Act became coded in the US law, it created the National Earthquake Hazards Reduction Program, which is termed NEHRP. You'll hear this a lot because it's the first and only national earthquake research program, and it's essentially to help us understand earthquakes, to map earthquakes, to predict earthquakes, and find techniques for reducing earthquake hazards. They have also appointed federal agencies that are involved in conducting this research and carrying through with the goals of NEHRP. And those include the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, the National Science Foundation, and the United States Geological Survey. I highly recommend you Googling NEHRP and getting a little bit more of the history of this law, because it's really what we have at a federal level that discusses and tries to mitigate the risks that we face in many of our states in this country. So as part of the evolution and the development of NEHRP, we also have an advisory committee on earthquake hazard reduction, which is a direct and public voice to the executive branch about the program. The advisory committee is also called ACER. That's what the acronym is. And if you're trying to understand how EERI is involved in this, we've actually had many EERI members and board members on committees past and present. In fact, I think some of the folks featured here might even be on this call. So our membership is actually called on a lot for this federal program, which is excellent for our knowledge and our ability to carry forward with some of the priorities that NEHRP is setting, and also that ACER is advising on. The NEHRP was up for reauthorization in 2018, and EERI's members, including my co-chair Chris Poland, were influential in sort of ensuring that the program continues forward over the next couple years and hopefully gets the funding it needs as well. So we worked with senators, we worked with various federal committees to ensure that this was up as a priority and that could make it through the various houses and ensure that it actually is something that stays with our, stays as code and law, as we do need the funding and the guidance to continue our work in earthquake risk reduction. And so this did become reauthorized at the end of 2018, which was excellent for us and a great learning opportunity as well for those of us that were newer to this process. And currently under NEHRP, we have been working on, or EERI members have been working on concepts of functional recovery, which is kind of culminated into a report that should be released soon. But with the Applied Technology Council, there was a cohort of different technical experts, many of whom are EERI members, that were contributing to a NIST and FEMA report. And so we're very much looking forward to its release soon, and hopefully we'll be able to continue discussing it at next year's virtual annual meeting. So for the history of state legislation, I just want to mention again that these are just picked, not in any sort of preferential way, but there might be many more pieces of state legislation that are out there, but I just wanted to highlight a couple. So in 1983, after the earthquakes that I mentioned, namely the 1971 San Fernando earthquake, the California Alfred E. Alkes Hospital Facility Seismic Safety Act became law, and it essentially regulates the design, construction, and alterations of hospitals, and it is currently managed by Oshkosh here in California. And why this is important is because we did also have another earthquake, and we'll continue having earthquakes here, in the 1994 Northridge earthquake, in which we saw that some of the regulations and the oversight of hospital construction actually did mitigate the effects of hospital damage as compared to the previous earthquakes, but not all the way. So we do, as with every earthquake, we learn from it and we begin to develop policies and improve policies based on filling our knowledge gaps and doing more enhanced research over time. So this is frequently amended and also has updates, and folks keep continuing to push it so that we can actually make sure that our hospitals are safe and don't have the catastrophic consequences as they did in 1971. Another one that I've chosen here is the 2005 Oregon statewide seismic needs assessment for schools and facilities, which was looking at public schools and community colleges along with emergency response and emergency-specific essential facilities as a starting point of understanding the risk to these critical buildings, and also the vulnerable populations, especially with schools that may inhabit these buildings. And so oftentimes you will see that assessment is a first part of kind of building the more public policy and more laws towards seismic safety. And the next one I wanted to mention is not on the Pacific Rim of Fire, but in Tennessee, because the Midwest and central U.S. also has seismic risk. We have the New Madrid fault zone along with many others. And so this just happened, was signed last year I believe that it was signed in December 2019, but the governor of Tennessee signed a proclamation for Earthquake Shakeout Day, which is exciting because this is something that might be newer to that region of the United States. And so it's more so getting people aware of the risk, which is a really important first step, especially when you have low to medium seismic risk, but folks are generally unaware. And so this is, quite important for especially the state in which perhaps there wasn't as much awareness or risk communication. So looking at some selected local pieces of seismic legislation and seismic programs, seismic risk reduction programs, we have in Salt Lake City the Fix the Bricks program, which is focusing on URMs, unreinforced masonry buildings, and using FEMA pre-disaster mitigation funds to channel through to various residents and homeowners to be able to retrofit their dangerous URM buildings. You see the their brochure here on your top right. In San Francisco, we had the soft story ordinance, or we have it, which is essentially looking at mitigating the risk of soft stories in multifamily residential buildings. And it took a tiered approach. It also impacted the, there were other laws that actually were and codes that were changed in San Francisco to ensure that folks were able to actually make it through the process needed to mitigate their soft story risk. And so you can see here on the bottom right a compliance tier and the dates where you had to submit permits of application with then subsequently a completion of work. So this was a stepwise program, and it is nearing its completion with a very high success rate, which is excellent. So we're looking forward to hear more about it. And then in Portland, Oregon, we had the URM placarding and tenant notification requirement, which was actually an ordinance that was repealed because the citizens were not, didn't feel like their views were were addressed in the original ordinance, and so they advocated that this not go through. And so now this particular placarding ordinance has been repealed, and it's a testament to why advocacy and sort of talking as a with a unified voice with your community or as EERI members can actually get your end goal, bring it to fruition essentially. But we are looking forward to sort of a revised version of a URM ordinance, and are looking to see how Portland might be able to continue addressing the threat of URMs, but in a way that's in line with what the community's needs, wants, and priorities might be. And so on that note of advocacy, I'm going to turn it over to Jack.
Thank you, Zara. I see my little green microphone going, so I will go ahead. Everyone, thank you for having us. The point of advocacy is to speak in a unified voice, as Zara said, and the importance of having a unified voice and really making an impression on lawmakers is that we are just one voice among many. As you see at the top, lots of people want lots of issues addressed. We hold seismic resilience very important to ourselves and to our organization and to the people in the wider world, but not everyone holds that same priority as their paramount priority. And as you can see, a lot of people have a lot of different issues that they would like their legislators to propose. We've got 5,400 bills in the California legislature that were introduced just this session. I don't actually know how New York gets through the 20,000 they seem to put up every year. It's amazingly impressive, and you see the small numbers in parentheses at the top is the actual number of legislators in both houses of their state legislatures that are having to deal with these thousands of bills every year. In California, I can understand dealing with 5,000, but Texas's legislature only meets for about 5 months every 2 years, so I am very impressed by their ability to clear that many bills in that much time. This is not the amount that become law, of course, but this is really showing the importance of getting our message forward and making sure it is coherent and impressionable with lawmakers. And we have a few different ways to do that. Next slide, please, Zara. A few ways to do that. Within EERI, we have our member base, our large member base, which we draw upon, and then we have regional chapters. Those can be different policy setting apparatuses. We have in California our own policy subcommittee that sort of advocates on different legislation that comes forward. We also have existing organizational programs that are like our collaboration. We collaborate with different groups within EERI, like SESI, the School Earthquake Safety Initiative, the Young Members Committee, like creating this webinar, and most recently the Public Health Committee in combining resilience with public health policy and how earthquake resilience can be combined with healthcare resilience in the wake of COVID-19. We also have the sort of new pursuit of having chapters align their chapters and regional groups align their goals with a bent of policy agendas. That way they can sort of focus on promoting seismic safety in their regions at the city level, at the state level, at the more regional level between a lot of different states, if that's sort of large target that we'd want to go for. And then outside EERI, we also can partner with organizations to expand our message, because as you saw, like thousands of bills, if one bill can consolidate the opinions of a larger group of constituencies or interest groups, the legislator is going to like that bill a great deal because it optimizes their time and the situation. So we are able to partner with Structural Engineers Association of insert state at different states. We're able to partner with social science groups that might examine economic impacts from earthquakes or the damage after earthquakes, or even something like fire following earthquakes, especially in California now with the rise of importance of wildfires and sort of the relative decline of the consideration of earthquakes. We can see how the concern for fire following an earthquake would be a very good motivation for considering seismic resilience as well as fire resilience. Next slide, please. So a way to accomplish this as members of EERI is to take advantage of the Citizen Advocate Toolkit that we've prepared, and that way we can make that unified message as an organization, and it will train us to better work with other organizations, and they might even learn something from us, hopefully. And then we can advance resilience and seismic policy together even more. So finding the Citizen Advocate Toolkit is pretty easy. It's on the main EERI page. You just go to the public policy banner and click on the Citizen Advocate Toolkit dropdown. Next slide, please. And then it takes you to this main page where it explains the basics of the Citizen Advocate Toolkit, and then you have the main file, which is a wide range of explanatory material on how the government works, how it is structured, how seismic resilience advocacy factors into it, and methods of communication with lawmakers and basics of government functionality like that. And we have also been pursuing the creation of these state fact sheets. A lot of resilience policy is created at the state level, as we say. NEHRP is a good framework for the federal government in terms of research and mitigation funding disbursements, but states have their very different seismic profiles of their municipal populations. Some might be very spread out with low population areas. California, we have a few very dense population areas, and then many medium population areas that we have to be concerned about. So interfacing with the state legislatures is very important. And these quick sheets give a snapshot of when your legislature meets, the length of the session, the committees in the legislature that have to do with seismic safety and seismic resilience and building code policies, and then just some brief history on seismic events in that state. So you have sort of some ammunition when you might be going for an impromptu talk with a legislator. Next slide, please. So finding your legislator. You want to make sure that you're going to the policy-making branch of government. The general structure of government in the US is the separation of powers, legislative, executive, and judicial. We, as the group that is trying to get policy made, care about the legislative branch. That's your US Congress, which is the Senate and the House of Representatives. That's your state legislatures, the quick sheets help with, and that is your city councils, which sometimes combine executive and legislative, but generally legislative. Next slide, please. So to find the people at different levels of federal, state, or city, county, municipal, we've provided a series of resources within the toolkit. So these are instructional pages that give you links to find different representatives. You could go to a variety of websites for the federal level, and we give advice on how to seek out your local representatives as well. The state-specific sheets also carry the specific House and Senate, like State House, State Senate pages where you can find your legislator. It's usually just typing in your zip code, or more specifically your address, to find it. Next slide, please. And once you've found your legislator, what do you want to do as an advocate, a citizen advocate? You want to move an EERI policy position forward. You want to advocate for resilience in your community and that sort of thing. So we provide material to sort of guide you on getting that point across, you, the engineer, the scientist, the seismologist, to this politician, this legislator, city council member, or even a congressperson. There's a few general routes you can go depending on the level you want to reach out to of government. You can try and schedule a meeting, usually with a member of Congress or a state representative. That might be with them, the member, or that might be with a staff member of theirs, people who are very versed in the area of resilience or seismic safety in California especially. Phone calls and letters are a very common way of getting in touch as well. And we have the sort of advice on staying brief, staying on topic, and keeping it within board. That way you stay on the message that EERI is trying to communicate, but you also come off personably and make an impression on the lawmaker or the staff member who's reading the letter and forwarding it on to the lawmaker, because we want the staff member to care about it and essentially say, this is something we should look at. This is something that caught my attention, that sort of thing. Next slide, please. And then the reason we give this guidance is because communication is the key thing. Being brief. Lawmakers, their staffers, even at the most local, even if it's the most extra job in the world where they actually have a full-time job, and then being a legislator is something they don't even want to be doing. They're busy. You have to meet with constituents. You have to meet with interest groups. You have to meet with other legislators, and then you have to actually legislate. There are a lot of time commitments they have, so being brief and just getting the point across is crucial. The staff members that they might have are also just as busy, and making sure that you can leave them with a quick message that they understand resilience, or to help them understand resilience and why it's important, is crucial. Being personable is also crucial. You're their constituent. They work for you. It is vital to advocate for why it is not just important to the whole community, but it is important to you, a voter, someone who cares about your community, that they need to care about this as much as you do. Your child goes to the school that the school board members are not paying enough attention to for the resilience legislation you want to advance. You don't want to worry about your taxes getting hiked up hugely to pay for replacing a government building that could have been retrofitted and just had minimal damage. You don't want to worry about having to move 3 states over because of a major subduction zone earthquake in Washington. And then knowing your audience is crucial as you pull on these emotional strings. You, as an EERI member advocate, are likely going to be coming from the field, the STEM field in some degree. It is just the nature of being an earthquake engineering research institute. It is very unlikely that you will be coming from the same field as the lawmaker. Members of Congress overwhelmingly have law degrees and were practicing lawyers of some kind. At the more local level, you might get more variety of jobs, but it's still not as often going to be engineers. So ensuring that you speak to them at a level that is understandable and gets the point across is crucial. Also, being concise and brief as much as possible. Next slide, please. Focusing in more on knowing your audience. These are complicated concepts, and you have very minimal time, very minimal space of words to communicate, as we've said. It is crucial to use the Advocate Toolkit as you can to simplify things, but essentially think about if a grade schooler or your child was asking you to explain earthquakes. You want to just get the most important points across. You want to not make it complex, you want to make it simple, and you want to put it in terms that they can understand. The politician cares about keeping taxes low, cares about economic vitality of the community and people's happiness in the community. Those are important. And just, if you say life safety, that sounds good enough probably, even though that might be the lowest performance measure we're seeking. We need to make it more about like the economic benefits that can come to a community because of strong resilience and seismic safety. And it's also important to educate but not lecture. They know that you're a subject matter expert, and you should recognize that they're a subject matter expert in the way of legislating, and ensure that being mutually respectful of those expertises will go a long way of making sure that seismic policy can stand a chance of them actually wanting to do something about it if they feel like they're being respected as a lawmaker. Next slide, please. So now I want to sort of go to the other side of the table of what it's like to be on the representative side. I managed to get 4 amazing internship experiences, with 2 with the U.S. House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., and 2 with the United States Senate in Cleveland when I was an undergrad. And they were some of the most informative experiences of my life. And the most informative aspect of them, the constant throughout all legislative positions, from the lowest city council, village town council, to the US Congress, is the constituents, the people you work for. Constituents are the most passionate people that you'll ever meet, because they want you to know that they are paying attention and that they care about how you think about issues. It is crucial to them. They can be very frustrated. They may believe that government is not doing enough for an issue they care about. We as engineers may often be frustrated with what the government is doing or not doing enough about in the resilience field. They are very curious. They want to know what you think. Most often, when responding to a constituent's phone call, them demanding to know how the member I was working for was going to vote on something, it was the most disappointing thing in the world to them that I wasn't able to give an answer immediately. They wanted to know, and we would have to get back to them later, which takes away time from doing other business for the representative and stuff like that. So being able to articulate an issue immediately and your position on it is crucial to giving constituents a good idea of what your thoughts are. And they're also very confident. The constituents are generally very sure that their opinion on an issue is correct. And they appreciate when you give them that leeway and let them follow in the footsteps of being right. They do not appreciate when you become argumentative with them or try and make them see the member's point of view if your representative that you're working for has different thoughts on the issue. And it is not a battle, but a dance to sort of convince them that your opinion and your member's voting choice is the correct one to take. Next slide, please. And then talking about the lawmakers themselves. As we said, we need to be brief when we're talking to them. It is hilarious how often, when giving a Capitol tour at the House of Representatives, this was about when the first season of House of Cards had come out. People just ask, is Congress really like that? Is Congress really full of evil plotting people and things like that? And it was so fun to tell them, absolutely not. No representative in the world has the time to plot that much. They are far too busy. They have to be at floor votes. They have to go onto the floor of the Senate and get on C-SPAN for at least 5 minutes so that they can show their constituents back home that they were there, they were on C-SPAN, they were giving us speeches. They have to leave the Capitol and be hounded by party staffers to raise money for their re-election campaigns. They have to go to subcommittee and committee hearings. They have to go to the markups for those committees and subcommittees where they actually decide how to amend legislation. They have to go to caucuses for their parties to vote on internal party positions and decide agenda items and fight about how they should decide on a policy that's coming up for a vote. They have to go meet the press, and they have to go to meetings with constituents, meetings with interest groups, and meetings with their own staff and with just smaller groups of lawmakers. It is a hectic schedule, and this is just when they're in Washington. Every weekend, they have to fly back home to their district and campaign and go to more events, more meetings, and go for more press attention to maintain that job they have. Next slide, please. So all this work, all this taking constituent anger, all this taking constituent appreciation, all this endless hours of taking in information as a lawmaker is to create legislation. They're built on the input of subject matter experts like us, of constituents, of interest groups that might not be subject matter experts, but they have the ability to get voters to care about an issue. Therefore, it's very important what they have to say on it. It survives on compromise. As you can see here, this is a bill that's been amended slightly, and that's sort of the process of adding it in when it's still very much in the markup phase, adding in entire lines, entire blocks of text just by handwriting. I'm sure that hands ache after the sessions. But by compromising, the example I cited a while earlier with fire resilience and seismic resilience, combining things and showing their shared mutual importance, that's how you can get things through. That's how you're able to maintain appeal to a wider range of lawmakers. The legislation is justified through expertise. It is based in the fact that lawmakers are sure that we have the right idea as experts, and that is a leveraging point we must always use. We need to ensure that we make a point of being the ones who should be trusted because we have the science behind us. That is a crucial point to make, regardless of the administration or regardless of what parties have control of which houses of Congress. And the most worrying thing is that even after all that input, all that expert testimony, and all that compromise, your legislation might just disappear because you don't have the votes. And this is why making the best impression on the highest number of lawmakers is crucial, because otherwise all that work through that whole session, getting it introduced on the floor through committees and onto the final voting floor will have meant nothing. You have to wait until the next session. Next slide, please. So this is just a slight example of the gone in an instant aspect. It is not meant to frighten or deter, but more to motivate. And you'll see that when that 213, meaning this amendment 213 to 212 score switches, as you'll see, the anger people have of this amendment not passing was quite vocal.
On this vote, the ayes are 212, the nays are 213. The amendment is not adopted.
So one of the great things about legislators is once you've convinced them that your issue is important, they will passionately advocate and fight for it, as we see when one side of the room got extremely angry when the vote ended up failing. And that's why this is I'm so pleased to have Zara as my webinar partner, because she has experience being back on the EERI advocating side of the table, advocating actually for, I believe, someone in this room, if this was after the 2018 election, which I think it was. So, oh no, this was not before. So someone who would soon be in this room, her congressman, Zara.
Thanks, Jack. There we go. Okay, so thank you for that, Jack. It was really interesting to see that video, and hopefully maybe one day I'll get to witness that live, because that is truly some sort of positive chaos there. I'll talk a little bit now about engaging with representatives, and also in the next couple of minutes about how young members and others that are on this webinar, any EERI members, can begin their advocacy journey. So I've had the pleasure to work with federal, state, and local representatives and policymakers. I've had a chance to go to DC and to Congress and to meet my representative, Ro Khanna. Here you see us on the right with the photo op, and really be the cheerleader for seismic safety. I realize that, and hopefully you all realize, that you might be one of the only constituents, if not the only constituent, that is a sort of technical expert in earthquake engineering or related fields, or is passionate about reducing the harmful effects of earthquakes, or really just wants to be more involved in policy and let your representative know that they can count on you if they ever have any questions about earthquakes and seismic safety. So some of the basic ways that I've engaged with my representatives, especially in the very beginning, is just to sort of call, email, and visit their office. Of course, now we can't visit in person, but it is still possible to do it remotely. Also, your representative is not going to be the one that you're going to be dealing with on a day-to-day basis, especially if you're working on legislation, which often is very rapid fire. So you'll usually be talking to a assigned legislative researcher or legislative aide that's focused on specific kinds of topics in the portfolio of legislation that that representative might be trying to push through. And that person will usually confer with you and ask you questions and maybe even ask you to write up a couple of bullet points that then are taken as points to different testimonies or to various committees. Keeping in touch with staff, whether the session is on or off, is still important, because ultimately speaking, we're trying to make relationships and you want to maintain that continuity. Town hall meetings are also really exciting, especially from the federal representative here, Ro Khanna, when it comes to the district. I like going to these because I get a sense of what the rest of the constituents are concerned about, and also to, again, be the cheerleader that's always bringing up the thing that nobody wants to talk about, which is earthquakes. And it also helps you sort of understand priorities and what people are really concerned about across the board, and therefore position your concerns relative to other kinds of issues that might be relevant or, fast rising in your community. Often, when the representative is in town, they'll ask for they'll ask for opportunities for constituents to meet with them on a first come first served basis. So before COVID, you could have 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes on one-on-one somewhere in the district. And for these, I'm always referring to our EERI policy position statements and actually bringing them, writing over them, highlighting them, and leaving it with the representative. It's really important that you use these statements because they're consensus driven based on our organization and our board, and it sort of gives that formality of the fact that there's an organizational concern about these particular policies. And you can take a look at some of these policies on our website, eeri.org. You can, of course, support initiatives, ordinances, and bills, and you can even just propose ideas. For example, in the city that I reside, we don't have an earthquake mitigation necessarily committee, but we do have a sustainability committee, and through that, they are talking about safety and resilience. And so you sort of get to know who those people are that are leading such committees and ensure that they know who you are. And of course, thank your representative too. So whether it's a federal representative or a mayor, make sure that you're following along with what they're doing. You can often sign up for newsletters or news blasts, or just follow them on whatever social media is most accessible to you. And make sure to thank them and let them know that you really appreciate the causes that they're supporting, especially if it has to do with aspects related to seismic safety or even climate change. So from the various meetings that I personally have had with representatives, but also our collective committee, we were able to sort of list out some of the things that we've learned over time. And these are also listed in the Citizen Advocate Toolkit. But really, you want to meet your representatives where they are and help them understand new concepts. Use scenarios like the Haywired scenario if you're living in the Bay Area, if you're talking about various kinds of losses and damage. They want to know in relation to what. They want to understand how bad it is. They want to make sure that they have data and facts to take to committee when they need to, but don't overwhelm them. And again, don't lecture them, as Jack had mentioned. You often don't want to catch a policymaker off guard, so you don't want to approach them and start telling them, why haven't you had any setbacks from the fault, or you want it to be a conversation, and you want to go through the proper channels, which is usually setting a meeting with the legislative aide and so on for you to be able to actually have a one-on-one with the legislator. And usually they'll ask you beforehand what you want to talk about, which preps them nicely for this conversation. And you ultimately, as I mentioned before, you want to become a trustworthy advisor. You want to be sure that they know that you're there for them if they have a question on seismic safety, or if they want some advice on some proposed bill language. And you don't have to know it all. You can always say, I don't know at the moment the answer to your question, but I will get back to you. And this is a place where the EERI policy committee and our subcommittees can be of great service to your endeavors, because we talk about seismic safety related issues on a macro perspective, but also on a very micro language specific perspective as well. We have learned in the past that as an organization, we want to speak with a unified technical voice with other organizations that are like-minded as often, as reasonably as possible. So we want to be sure that we are not having conflicting information that we're giving to the same representative on the same language or the same bill. We want to really be sure that we've covered our bases and know who's going to say what and what kind of language is being submitted as a memo or as a letter of support or otherwise. It's really important that we do this, because oftentimes if we don't see eye to eye on major topics and major issues as a technical community, then the legislators is not going to know what to do with that conflict that's happening internally. So of course you can't always have the same opinions, but as much as possible, speak with a unified voice. And what's always important to remember is that policy priorities are relative. So what might be the most important thing to you in the world on mitigating seismic risks may be on a whole table of priorities that are presented to your policymaker. As Jack was talking about, the constituents, everybody thinks their opinion is right, and everybody thinks that their opinion is, or their topic is, the most urgent. And I think through these processes, and hopefully many of you will join our committee, but through these processes, you'll learn to be very understanding of compromise and stakeholders, and the relationship building part of it is really important, because that's what the policymakers are doing all day long, and we want to support them in being proponents of seismic safety and earthquake risk reduction. And I just want to say that no action is too small to start your advocacy journey. And as young members, you can begin by simply reading the Citizen Advocate Toolkit and the state sheets, find out who represents you, check their committees, their re-election status, of course, in an election year like this one. You want to review your state's legislative calendar so you can understand when you should start really ramping up your ideas for proposed bills, or reigniting a bill that might have gone dead in the last session. You want to go on our Legislative Action Center, which I'll show in a slide or two, to review any past legislation and programs, and also get a sense of kind of EERI's positions and how we submit our letters to various representatives, and kind of the language that we use, whether we support it fully or whether we have some amendments. It's always good to know how the EERI board and our committees are recommending support or change. And then as a longer term, you might want to consider joining a local committee, and I'm talking more like at a city level. Now that everything's virtual, maybe this might be more accessible to you, but there are many kinds of committees that exist, and some of them might be more relevant to seismic safety than others, but you can join, and they have, some requirements, but it's a good way to get involved and understand how your local government works, so that you can, when the time is right, and if not already, bring up seismic safety and how you want to be able to be an advocate and a technical expert and a liaison to bringing some new ideas to your community on safety, and bringing that forward by understanding the governance. And so here's an image of the Legislative Action Center, which is right off of our public policy tab of the Institute's website. Here we'll list various bills that we're tracking through our subcommittees. So currently we have a California Legislative Subcommittee, so you'll see some California bills that we're tracking, also some from the last sessions and what our status as EERI was on them. You'll see some bills and legislation from other states as well, but highly recommend you take a look at this. Peruse the website here. Also want to mention to you and end off with talking about what our policy committee does. So we talked a bit about the history of seismic safety. We talked about working for representatives, what it's like to sort of engage with them, and some of the lessons we've learned. But in the immediate, how can the Public Policy and Advocacy Committee support your desire to want to become an advocate? So at the national and international level, we're focusing on federal seismic safety, like NEHRP, coordination with our various regional chapters, capacity building and consensus driven policy statements. So Jack had mentioned the resilient health systems policy statement that we've been working on since the onset of COVID. We would love for you to engage on different kinds of topics. I mean, it involves a lot of research. It might be really unique and interesting and exciting for you to be involved with that, but it's a really great process, a great learning, kind of a great learning tool for you to understand how not only you do research on various kinds of earthquake safety topics, but also how we put it in a format that's available and accessible to policymakers. From a regional chapter and subcommittee level, we're focusing on creating subcommittees and giving regional chapters the tools to start thinking more about legislation that's statewide or local, and begin to start connecting with lawmakers on how to support sort of these various kinds of legislation, or even propose, or just begin by taking the first step and contacting a representative on behalf of a regional chapter president or board. And currently we're working on creating a Citizen Advocate Toolkit for regional chapters, which hopefully will help as a guide for other areas in the country and internationally as well. And on member level, we're focusing on helping with capacity building and gaining skills for advocacy through the toolkit. And so we would love to see how the toolkit is applicable and implementable in your day-to-day, and hopefully can learn about how you've taken your first steps. So what's in your citizen advocacy future? What aspect of the profession or field of study are you most passionate about? What change do you want to see? And you can start answering these questions by learning who your representatives and policymakers are. Take your first step or a new step, and you don't have to see the whole staircase just to take the first step. Sometimes it can feel really overwhelming because you've only known how to talk about earthquakes in one way, but trust me, this is a really great way to broaden your impact and also learn about governance and learn about how you can make change. And with that, I'd like to encourage all of you to join our committee, consider bolstering your regional chapter committee, or working with some of our other committees on policy-related aspects. Thank you all.
All right, so I think now we'll open it up to questions. As mentioned before, you can type your questions in the questions panel on the GoToWebinar panel. I have a couple of questions to start with. So as an EERI young professional who joins PPA, what would be your role, and what kinds of projects and policy statements do you get to work on?
I'm happy to answer that question. So usually when a young member is considering joining the committee or is interested in the committee, I'll try to have a one-on-one with you to understand a little bit more about what you're interested in. It's not really prescriptive. It's more about where you see your skills kind of fitting into, what gaps you see either locally or statewide, and also based on some of the other ongoing priorities and work that we're engaging in. So it's rather than saying, hey, young member, just do this, just do this policy paper. It's more like a conversation about your interests and where they may fit. And what's exciting is that the policy committee is also broadening to work with young, the School Earthquake Safety Initiative, other committees like the Public Health Working Group. So we're sort of growing in the ways that we want to merge our interests. And so it would be great to sort of learn from the young members about, where you see your skills kind of applied best. And we'll find a way to make it fit for you. So hopefully that answers that question, Amanda.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so another question I have written down is, do you see in general private companies like design firms or the like get involved in legislation in this way, or is it normally a more sort of grassroots or third-party nonprofit organization that does the bidding? Like, do private companies have any role working with EERI on the matter?
Usually it's through organizations that your professional organizations or other organizations that you approach a representative. So We may have many members that are part of a particular firm, but in my experience thus far, the firm hasn't come up and said that, you know, so-and-so company is in support of this this piece of legislation. It's more like the members who are EERI members are in support of, you know, certain policies. Maybe Jack, you have some experience based on working with constituents, whether private companies are reaching out to you, or is it more organizations or more individual members?
Usually it's been maybe a group of private companies will be reached out to by a nonprofit organization like EERI. So it would actually be maybe the reverse, like if we reached out to AECOM or something like that, and then a bunch of other companies, and then they write some press release or something saying we support this act in conjunction with EERI. And then maybe then the constituents who maybe work at the company, if they were so inclined, because can't force them, but like if they were so inclined, they might then call and say, hey, my company supports this, I support this, this expert group supports this, like care about this.
Awesome, interesting. I guess one question about the Citizen Advocate Toolkit. Do you have an example, or could you walk us through how to track seismic legislation in a particular state? Maybe because this is something that varies state to state.
That was an approach I had worried about for making the state sheets. Generally, each state sheet has the web URL where you can go to find the all the bills that are introduced in each term, and from there it's usually on each state legislature's website. It's generally a matter of keyword searching, and there can be somewhat advanced features, somewhat not. That depends on the state legislature, but at the very minimum they'll have usually keyword searches, and you can look up things like seismic, resilience, earthquake, that sort of thing, and you'll get most of it.
Yeah, and to add to that, if you are not one of the 5 states that we have a state seismic sheet for, or state legislative history sheet for, we have California, Alaska, Utah, Oregon, and Washington right now. But if you're in a state and you don't have one yet, please help us make one, because we are hoping to hit as many states in which we have a majority of members. And the goal for the Legislative Action Center is to actually have more updated legislation that we're tracking. But again, like Jack said, you can go on your state legislature's website and type in keywords. Sometimes you can get email notifications if you just put in your key search words, and that's always really helpful.
All right, thank you. If there are any follow-up questions, well, I think that covers it. So that's awesome. Thank you so much, you two, for putting this together. I think it's really important. And thank you for taking the time to give this webinar today.
Thank you for having us.
Of course.
Thank you so much.
To those attending, please complete the webinar survey to provide your feedback. Also, if you're not already an EERI member and you're interested, see a follow-up email for more info on how to join, and same goes for the Younger Members Committee. And to find out more about upcoming EERI webinars, please check out the EERI Pulse newsletter. And thank you for all who attended.